We're going to demonstrate how to do data analysis in the den of inquiry with this pendulum experiment. We have a setup that lets us adjust the length of the pendulum. Here we set it to 22.5 centimeters. And we set it going and get a stopwatch. And we're going to count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's 10 and a half seconds for 22.5 centimeters. We're going to use LoggerPro to enter and analyze our data. We'll begin with this data table, and we'll start by changing the names of the columns. I'll double-click to edit the column, which brings the column options dialog. Let's give it a more meaningful name. Instead of X, let's call it length. We'll give it a short name of L, and its units are centimeters. We double-click Y to change the next column. We'll call this one time 10 because it was the time for 10 periods. And we'll give it a short name T10, and seconds is its units. You can start to enter the data. As you may remember, the first length was 22.5 centimeters. The time was 10.5 seconds. The next was 16.8 centimeters, 9.46 seconds. And we will continue entering data. And here at the end we have a long one, 32.4, 12.37 seconds. Now all our data are entered. LoggerPro has begun to make a graph, but we'll soon see how to make that even better. LoggerPro makes a graph by default, but when we've entered data ourselves, sometimes we may want to improve it. Double-click the graph itself, which brings up the Graph Options dialog. There are two things you need to do. Turn on point protectors and turn off connect points. When you click Done, which you can't see right now, you can see the points actually appear. The next thing you may want to do is to auto-scale the graph. If you click this button on the toolbar, the graph expands so that the points fill the available space. I like to do one more thing. I like to click the minus magnifying glass and zoom out one step. Lets me see a little bit more. Just one more thing to make note of. If you want to change what variable is on which axis, you can point at the variables themselves and a menu appears so you can choose a different variable if you like. We have a table and a graph for our pendulum data, but there's a problem. We still have time 10 on this vertical axis instead of the period itself. We need to create a new calculated column over here in the data set. So I go to the Data menu and choose New Calculated Column. This brings up the Calculated Column dialog, where we put in the name of the new column, which will be period, the short name, which we'll use capital T. This is still going to be in seconds. Now we put in the equation. You can enter variables using this menu here. I'm going to take time 10. Notice how it appears with quotes, and divide it by 10 in order to get the period. I click Done. You can't quite see it. Let's make this smaller and this a little bigger, and now you can see the new column where the division has taken place. To put it on the graph, I just point at time 10 and press the mouse button. Choose period from the menu instead of time 10. Now I have the data here. I auto-scale, zoom out a little bit, and here's the graph with the period instead of 10 times the period. We have a table, we have a graph. Now we probably want a model, a mathematical function to try to fit our data. Often the first thing we try is a line. This button with R equals is the linear fit button up in the toolbar. Press it and LoggerPro creates a line. It fits it automatically. Here the correlation is 0.99, which is very high, but don't let that deceive you. See how the points are slightly curved and the line is straight? We also might expect that the data should go through 0, 0, but the line has an intercept of more than half a second. So there's something seriously wrong with this model. We'll get rid of it by clicking on this little X, the close box in the corner of this model box. Now the line has gone away, and we have to figure out how to put on a curve. But what curve? In this case, we assumed you've studied this already in class, and you can look in the book and find this formula. T, the period, is 2 pi square root of L over g, where L is the length and g is the acceleration of gravity. How are we going to get that formula onto this curve? Up here next to the linear fit button is the curve fit button. Click that to get the curve fit dialog. First thing, select manual. Next, the function we want is not in this list here, so we're going to click define function. Our custom function is going to be 2 times pi times the square root of L over g, just like the formula. And it's not Gaussian. We're going to give it a new name. It's the pendulum function. When we do that, we see that it recognizes the one parameter, g. We'll give g a reasonable value, such as 1,000. You can see the little picture of the curve up here. When I click OK, the curve appears on the graph and it says it's a manual fit. The value of g isn't quite right, but that doesn't matter. If I just point at the g and click, these two little arrows appear, and now I can use the up and down arrows on the keyboard in order to change the value of g. I can also click here and type a different value, for example 750. When I press return, the curve changes. However, you can see that the shape of the curve does not match the shape of the data. It's even worse than the line, even though it's the right curve. That's because there's something important we've overlooked, and that's what we'll fix next. The problem was in how we measured the length. We measured from the very top where it was suspended. That's correct. But down at the bottom, we measured to the knot, not to the washers. That's why we have 22.5 centimeters for this measurement. Really, the measurement should be closer to 27.5 centimeters. There are several ways to use LoggerPro to apply this correction, this additional 5 centimeters. Here's one. We're going to create a new column for the corrected length. So I go to the Data menu, choose New Calculated Column, and I'm going to make a name like core length for corrected length, and that's going to be in centimeters, and I need to give it an equation. My equation is going to be the length plus 5 centimeters. When I click Done, I get a new column, the corrected length. There's the 27.5. To put this on the graph, as before, I point at length, click, and choose corrected length from the menu. Now corrected length is plotted against period. We want to put our function back on. I click the curve fit button, click manual. The pendulum function is already selected. I want to put in a reasonable value for g, such as 1,000. Click OK, and look at that. This time the curve goes nearly through all the points. If we looked more closely, we could refine the value of g further, but this gives us a good idea that our data analysis is correct.